Welcome to Cogito Design, a video series where we take a deep dive into some of the cutting-edge ideas within the tabletop game design industry. Picture the scene. You are sat at a gaming table in a perfectly lit room. There's a wide, sprawling map in the centre of the play space, and dozens of tiny figurines cover the various regions of a fantasy world. You have areas of your own to protect, unexplored regions to discover, and enemy strongholds to conquer. It is your move, and you know success depends on the decisions you make right now. There is something so primal and thematic about scenarios like this one. You are the commander of an army, and the battlefield lays out in front of you. Video games from the Age of Empires to the classic Civilization series have tried to simulate this experience digitally, and often very well, but personally there is little more thematic in gaming than lifting your soldiers from one area of a map and marching them into the fray onto an adjacent space. Today I'm going to be discussing the mechanism which, in my opinion, naturally gives us the most thematic tabletop experiences. I'm talking, of course, about area control. Area control is a mechanism that's a little tricky to define. Essentially, it covers any game where there are different zones of influence, typically but not always, on a map, and players compete for control over these areas, usually by moving their pieces into that area. The classic example of this is, of course, Risk, where players roll dice to destroy opponents' armies and take over regions of the world. Risk is often colloquially known as a member of the dudes on a map genre of game, and many of these games utilise a version of the area control mechanism. I particularly like the dudes on a map as a term. Much like the movie Snakes on a Plane contains the entire plot in its title, this mechanism's name contains within it an almost complete description of what it is. But as with most mechanisms, there is much nuance about what area control is and is not. For example, it is often combined with a similar mechanism called area majority, which tends to occur more often in Euro-style games, where the hostile aggression of games like Risk is often avoided. The definitive example for an area majority game would be El Grande. In El Grande, players will share regions of the map, competing to have the most of their tokens in each region, but with happy bonuses for those in second place and much less death and destruction. Area control games, by contrast, tend to demand that only one player has control of a region of the map. In this video, I'll be discussing examples from both of these interconnected mechanisms, as there is often a lot of grey area between them. The history of this mechanism dates back thousands of years, and controversially, I would suggest that one of the earliest examples of this style of game is the classic game of Go. Whilst not officially recognised as an area control game, in Go, players aim to capture territory on an epic 19 by 19 square grid by tactical placement of their uniquely coloured stones. Their opponents do the same, and if ever any of their pieces are completely surrounded by their opponents, these pieces are captured, adding to the final score of the capturing player. Despite BGG's claims to the contrary, it sounds and feels a little area control-y to me. It is also a mechanism that has been consistently used in wargames throughout the years, and whilst the earliest of these were often closer to chess than an area control game, they did have that dudes on the map feel to them, even as far back as the 18th century. But of course, the most famous progenitor of this mechanism is the one we have already mentioned, Risk. Invented by the French film director Albert Lamorisse in 1957, its appeal led Parker Brothers to purchase the rights to the game in 1959. And since then it has gone on to consistently sell copies in the millions, proving to be one of the most popular board games in the world to this very day. Around the same time, the game Diplomacy was released by the Avalon Game Company, which also went on to spearhead the popularity of this mechanism. Then in 1995, the previously mentioned El Grande was released, popularising a new, kinder, Euro-style use of the game. And since then, we've seen a seemingly endless amount of games using and innovating on this mechanism. Of the 237 pages listing area control games on BGG, 213 are games from the 21st century, So it seems very clear that this mechanism isn't going anywhere anytime soon. So what is it that makes this particular mechanism so enduringly popular? Well, I think there are several factors that area control and majority games have going for them. The first of these, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this, is the uncanny ability this mechanism has in creating immensely thematic experiences. Area control games work well with all kinds of components, but the classic mix of a large open map and intricate plastic miniatures are a hugely effective combination. Take the Game of Thrones board game. The movement of your troops from region to region with the infamous hidden instructions, negotiation and betrayal that makes this game what it is simply would not work in any medium better than an area control game on a tabletop. It literally looks like you're in a scene from the show. I mean, I assume you also dress in plate armor for your candlelit game nights. This leads to another advantage of this mechanism. It works particularly well on the tabletop. The aerial view of maps mixed with the tactile pleasure of plastic minis suit the mechanism perfectly. And in my opinion, this creates even more satisfying gameplay than video games, which utilise a similar approach, such as the excellent Civilization series. But of course, I'm a little biased. A final advantage of area control is how well it seems to fit into a wide variety of different kinds of board games. I've already mentioned how often it's used in wargaming, dudes on a map style games, and even Euro games, but the mechanism fits perfectly into 4X games too. 4X games are those that contain the features of exploring areas, expanding territory, exploiting resources, and exterminating enemies. Just look at the classic Twilight Imperium for a great example of this. All this praise, however, does not mean that the mechanism is without any flaws. There are several issues that can arise with area control games. The first one is present in the classic game Risk. Many players complain about the imbalance of this game, and that once a player begins to win, it can create a cascading effect, where the player in the lead can easily compound their advantages, whilst things continue to get harder and harder for those in the rear. In Risk, the rule where players gain more armies based on how many territories they already possess is a clear example of this issue. In Risk, this is mitigated at higher player counts by the players themselves, who will often work together to bring down any obvious leaders. It does, however, unfortunately mean the game works poorly at 2 players. This is another common criticism of area control games, and many of the top games in this category have regular complaints from players who play at lower player counts. That being said, it is by no means a guarantee for these games. Star Wars Rebellion, for example, is clearly an area control game, but it's specifically designed for 2 players. Another criticism commonly laid at the feet of area control games is that they can be a little mean at times. The great player interaction they engender has the downside that players who like the classic Euro-style game can feel a bit put off by area control. The mechanism often forces you to compete directly for space and allows plenty of opportunity for combat. This is obviously a subjective criticism, as many players love this aspect of the mechanism, but it is worth designers bearing in mind that if their players are looking for the classic Euro experience, it can be tricky to deliver it in an area control style game. That being said, several developers have managed this. The hugely successful Spirit Island, for example, gets round the issue by being a co-op game, where the area control is the players working together against the artificial intelligence of the game itself. So, like all the other mechanisms we've looked at in this series, even Roll and Move, the mechanism itself is only as good as the designers using it, and we are very fortunate to have had a huge amount of excellent designers innovate on this mechanism. And I, for one, am very excited to see what's to come. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you're liking our channel, then please like this video and subscribe to show your support. And a massive thank you, as always, to our loyal patrons who help us bring you these videos. Thank you. See you next time. Bye.